Okay, folks. I want to share some more information on this whole thing going on with Hawaii, and I'll try to make it as short as I can. I'm trying to find additional information just because I was coming across some images that I thought were kind of curious that were showing like um, pre-cut poles and stuff like that, kind of like pre-cut beams in buildings that we are familiar with. But I do think that some of those images are older images, and this was a story that was put up back in 2019 about a group of protesters and vandals that cut down utility poles. And I think that some of the images that we might have been seeing recently might be some of the images that were being circulated back then. But I find it curious that back in 2018, extra utility poles are going away under 45 million Hawaiian Telecom and HECO deal. Now, apparently, these are unnecessary utility poles and there were a lot of duplicates. So they had agreed that they were going to remove 14,000 utility poles. And I'll read a little bit of this article here, but there's quite a few bits of information that I want to get into here. And I want to talk about this validated list of names of individuals who remain unaccounted for. And this is kind of interesting here. This from Honolulu Civil Beat from August 31st, yesterday. A FAQ, fire facts, and information that I want to share as well. And then there's just a lot of information here that I want to share really quick. This is some interesting data concerning Lahaina as well that I want to get into. But I want to go back here to this article that was published up again, because I'm repetitive, I'll say it again, November 2nd of 2018. They talk about unnecessary utility poles are all over Hawaii because two companies that share most of them often disagree about their responsibilities. Mhm. Now that problem has been resolved. In a move that will eliminate 14,000 unsightly poles, Hawaii Telecom agreed to let Hawaiian electric companies have sole ownership of about 120,000 utility poles on Oahu, Hawaii Island, Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. The agreement ends nearly a century of joint pole ownership between the electrical utility and its longtime partner that was once just a phone company. Under the new arrangement, Hawaiian Telecom will lease pole space for its telephone, internet, and TV transmission lines. In return, Hawaiian Electric will provide Hawaiian Telecom with a $48 million credit, though $26 million of that covers disputed past costs of jointly owning poles. The two companies had been negotiating a settlement of long-running disputes over joint pole ownership for more than a year. The State Public Utilities Commission recently approved the agreement that settles the disputes and delivers sole pole ownership to Hawaiian Electric. John Kamaiji, Hawaiian Telecom president and general manager, called the deal a win for both companies and the state. Quote, with this change, Hawaiian Telecom joins many other communications providers that lease space on poles, enabling us to channel more of our resources toward investment in fiber and expansion of next-gen services statewide, he said in a statement, end quote. Alan Oshima, Hawaiian Electric president and CEO, said in a statement that owning the poles alone will allow his company to more efficiently deploy new equipment on poles for services that benefit customers. Quote, in the nearly 100 years since the first joint pole agreement, our businesses and maintenance practices have changed dramatically, end quote, he said. Sharing utility pole ownership historically was done to minimize the number of poles in communities and reduce expenses for companies that needed such infrastructure. On Oahu, joint pole ownership dated to 1922 with Hawaiian Electric, Mutual Telephone Company, and streetcar operator Honolulu Rapid Transit Company, according to Hawaiian Electric. In more modern times, however, joint pole ownership was a source of discord for Hawaiian Electric and Hawaiian Telecom. Problems included how much Hawaiian Telecom should pay for new poles or even whether new poles were necessary. As a result, sometimes two poles carried lines when only one was necessary. This occurred in cases where Hawaiian Telecom disagreed over the need for a new pole. Hawaiian Electric would install a new pole for its use and cut off the top of the adjacent old pole where its lines used to hang, while Hawaiian Telecom kept its equipment on the old pole. The two companies figure 14,000 such double poles exist. The agreement calls for these old poles kept by Hawaiian Telecom to be removed within the next 10 years, with Hawaiian Telecom paying $650,000 a year for the work. So over 10 years, this was published in 2018. So that's 5 years. 5 years later, Um, yeah, I know that seems like a pretty big expense. $650,000 a year. They they've saved a lot if any of it involves parts that were burnt recently. Hawaiian Electric will have higher pole expenses as a sole owner, but the company said extra revenue will more than cover the added expense, which means rate paying customers won't be negatively affected. Under the agreement, Hawaiian Telecom will pay $5 million a year to rent space on utility poles through a fixed rate for 10 years. Some of this rent will be covered by the credit, and any new equipment added to the poles would incur an extra fee. Other companies that use utility poles, including Hawaii's other major phone, internet, and TV service provider Spectrum, as well as mobile phone service providers, are expected to pay $4.4 million in annual pole use fees. New equipment from emerging technology is expected to enhance future revenue from pole use. Hawaiian Electric said being the only owner of utility poles will make it easier to approve equipment additions while also making pole repair and replacement faster and safer. Of the poles involved in the transaction, 51,000 are on Oahu, 46,000 are on Hawaii Island, and 24,000 are in Maui County. Kauai has a customer-owned electrical utility, so Hawaiian Telcom will continue to have a mix of its own poles and jointly owned poles on that island. There are also 50,000 utility poles around the state that Hawaiian Electric has long owned by itself. The state and counties, which use utility poles for streetlights, also maintain joint ownership of some utility poles on Oahu and Hawaii Island, though Hawaiian Electric said it is working to acquire the government interest in those poles. So, 14,000 utility poles to be removed there. I just thought that was kind of a curious story there too, in this Vandal story. But I want to share just a little bit more information about it because there are certain things that are taking place and that lead up to events like this. And it says here, in the first moments of the Maui fires, when high winds brought down power poles, slapping electrified wires to the dry grass below, there was a reason the flames erupted all at once in long, neat rolls. Those wires were bare, uninsulated metal that could spark on contact. And now, this is the part where I'm not going to read much more of it, but I want to interject something, okay? I've seen some of the footage that shows, like, cast aluminum melted on the ground from vehicles, and cast aluminum type of parts, and light aluminum type of parts that are like dust. They just crumble into dust. Okay. So if there were a bunch of utility wires and stuff that had a protective coating on them, and this particular area was struck with an intense amount of energy, that would have just pretty much eliminated that protective coating. And folks, I've shown it in previous videos, and because I'm repetitive, I have to say it again. They have been attempting to test our resilience to these things for decades. It was most of the testing that was done as far as nuke testing in the past was done to test these hard lines, to test the protective coatings. Okay. And I believe they have absolutely reached a point where they can compromise those protective coatings. All right. And now you want to push the satellite service and stuff like that, but you need to remember, it's the hard lines that are going to survive. And it's some of these testing procedures and these things like this where they can set the standards and moving forward in some of their other projects, folks. I'm telling you, I don't want to get too much into that because I've already kind of covered that quite a bit, but there's a lot to be said about the advancements in technologies and things when it comes to directing energy. I will say that. And I've shown more than enough proof and more than enough information that, anyone with any ability to logically discern information could come to a very logical conclusion that some of the imagery and some of the things that we're seeing coming out of some of these areas where these events occur, like these Maui fires, don't have nature's signature upon them. If you catch my drift, all right? They just don't. Not natural. Firebacks. What caused the Maui fires? The cause of the fire that scorched Lahaina has not been determined. Agents with the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives continue to investigate. However, Maui County joined a growing number of parties in suing Hawaiian Electric Company, alleging that destruction could have been avoided had the utility de-energized its power lines on the island. Video footage from the day of the blazes showed dangling power lines over burning brush in the areas where the fire started. For its part, Hawaiian Electric said Maui County should shoulder some of the blame. Yeah. While a fire sparked the morning of August 8th, 8/8, in Upper Lahaina was apparently caused by damaged power lines. Pico said its crews left the area after Maui County firefighters deemed that fire extinguished. Later that afternoon, another fire sparked in Lahaina and ultimately burned the town. I'm telling you, folks, I've seen some of the video footage, and the date is kind of curious. I did, um, I set it back to public viewing. It was on private viewing, but I put it back on public viewing because I want to reiterate this whole date, this thing with dates. The 8/8 is kind of curious, when they talk about it being sparked there in Lahaina. And, August 11th of 1958 was the anniversary of um, one of the most secret and most clandestine nuclear tests in nuclear test history, and it was called Orange Shot. It was part of Project Argus, and this is a video that I put up showing some more of that footage from that blast wave from 2018, and I'm not going to let that go, folks. I believe that we were subjected to some very unnatural energies, and we were subjected to some testing that we did not consent to, and I'm not going to let it go. So this video, I'll put a link in the description as well. This is it's just another part of a bigger, piece of the story, because Hawaii was part of that story back in 1958 as well. And the fact that here it is again, 65 years later, almost to the day, Hawaii is burning.